If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Those are the famous words that Johnny Cochran used in the closing statements during the O.J. Simpson trial. It is important to be educated on this case because this case is one of the most famous trials in history, and the effect of this trial had on the United States still impacts us today. Ever since I heard of the O.J. Simpson case, I've become addicted to finding every angle and detail about the case and verdict. I'm going to inform you on the complexities and social issues involved with O.J. Simpson murder trial. I'm going to give you background on O.J. I'll discuss the two victims, Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, as well as the evidence that the prosecution defense used. Lastly, I'll talk about the effect the O.J. Simpson case had on people across America. Before the murder trial of the century, many people knew O.J. as a Hall of Fame running back for the NFL. O.J. Simpson is also monitored as one of America's biggest stars personalities. He's been in TV shows and movies. He's famously starred in the Naked Gun series. And O.J. was once married to the deceased Nicole Brown from 1985 to 1992. They had two children, Sydney and Justin. I'll now talk about the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman were brutally murdered June 12, 1994, and it was a horrific scene with blood everywhere. Luckily, the children were upstairs in the Brown residence still sleeping when the authorities arrived. According to Nicole and Ron's autopsy reports, they were each stabbed over a dozen times. Ron was even mutilated, and the medical examiner concluded that he was stabbed post-mortem. At the crime scene, they did not find a weapon, which was assumed to be a knife. And drastically, the case came to a change when detectives arrived to inform Nicole's ex-husband, O.J. Simpson, about what happened. When the detectives arrived at Simpson's estate, he was not there. One of the detectives, Mark Furman, a 20-year-old veteran of the LAPD, noticed there was blood on a white Bronco, and that belonged to O.J. The detectives believed that O.J. may be endangered, so entered his property without a warrant. Detectives Furman began to walk around the house, and on the side of the house, he discovered a bloody glove. I'll now discuss the events that led up to O.J.'s arrest. DNA testing showed that the blood found on the Ford Bronco and the glove found at Simpson's house contained the blood of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. 4 days after the murder, a warrant was issued for O.J.'s arrest. O.J. was given the chance to turn himself in to the authorities by 11 a.m. on June 17, 1994. However, O.J. refused to surrender, and what happened next gained the attentions of millions of Americans across the world, and there's something that is still talked about today. O.J. was in a Ford white Bronco with longtime friend A.C. Collins and had a gun to his head, threatening to kill himself. For over an hour and a half, every major news network was following O.J. as he sped down the Interstate 405. It was an unreal scene. People were lined up on bridges and on the side of the interstate with signs and cheering on O.J. The car chase was even played over the NBA Finals. Millions of Americans were watching this unfold. O.J. eventually returned home and surrendered himself to the police. Now I will discuss the trial of the century and the lasting impact this trial had on millions of Americans. Before I get into anything, you should be educated on what's going on at the time in LA. Recently in LA, the Rodney King incident happened, and Rodney King was an African-American man who was pulled over after trying to outrun the police over a suspicion of a DUI. When the officers stopped him, they severely beat him with batons. He suffered 11 skull fractures and sued the city. In court, the officers didn't face the punishment the public really wanted, and many say that this led to the Los Angeles riots in 1992, which caused mass destruction in LA and hundreds of deaths. So CBS News did a poll in 1995 surveying whites and African Americans on their opinion of the case. 64% of white people surveyed they believe that O.J. did do it and was guilty, while 60% of African Americans surveyed believed he was innocent. Clearly, there was a racial divide. Simple to say, the tension between the LAPD and the community were still at a dangerous level during the case. The trial of the century took over the world each day. The courtroom was nationally televised and was a spectacle to watch. The prosecution centered their case around O.J. Simpson's rage and past abuse of Nicole and the DNA evidence found at his house. The defense aimed to prove that the evidence found was tampered with and planted by racist LAPD officers. The prosecution started out strong with presenting the jury with a precise timeline leading up to the events of the murder, and then gathered witness testimony as long as testimony from the detectives who collected the evidence. the glove and the Bronco. Mr. Simpson assembled a so-called dream team led by Robert Shapiro, Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, and attorney and close friend Robert Kardashian. The defense argued that the evidence found at OJ's estate was planted by racist LAPD officer Mark Furman. There's suspicions that Furman was racist, and on stand, one of the defense attorneys asked Furman if he's ever used the N-word, and under oath he said never. In a shocking twist, the defense obtained a recording of Furman bashing African Americans, talking about shooting them, and using the N-word many times throughout. This tape altered the view of the jury, was played in court, and clearly made a lasting impact on the juries moving forward. Another main twist in the case happened when prosecution asked OJ to try on the glove found at the crime scene. When OJ tried that glove on, it didn't fit. There's many theories for why it didn't fit, and maybe it just didn't fit, but all in all, it was probably a blunder by the prosecution, which was led by Marcia Clark and Chris Darden, and they were heavily criticized throughout the whole case. Johnny Cochran, a famous civil rights lawyer, argued in closing statements that Furman and the LAPD had planted all the evidence and even compared Furman to Hitler in his closing statements. He reiterated Furman's use of the N-word. At the end of his final statement, Cochran used the phrase that he's now famous for: "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." Marcia Clark pleaded with the jury to stay focused on the facts and the evidence and not let race be the determining factor in their decision. After only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury came to a verdict. In the case of the murder of Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman, the jury finds the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty. It is important to remember that this case is a tragedy about two young adults who were brutally murdered. Nicole Brown and Ronald Goldman are often lost in the shuffle of the media frenzy that occurred because of who the main suspect was. I did my best to inform you on the many twists and turns that happened during this case, and I also tried to display that this case was more than just a murder case and affected millions of people across the world. I only have one question. Did he do it? Thank you.